Eddie Gaines paid $1,300 for a bull that the auctioneer said wasn't worth the trailer space to haul him home. That was a Tuesday in September at the Anderson Livestock Auction in upstate South Carolina. Lot 12. A 12-year-old Hereford bull. Red body, white face. The breed markings faded and dusty the way old Herefords get when the years pile up and nobody's brushing them anymore. He was thin. Not starving thin. Neglect thin. The kind of thin that happens when an animal is getting fed, but nobody's paying attention to whether the feed is enough. His catalog entry said, aged bull, no longer breeding, consigned for salvage. The consigner was a man named Bobby Rusk from Oconee County. Bobby had run the bull for 8 years and decided he was done. Not because the bull was sick, not because he'd failed a breeding soundness exam, because Bobby looked at 12 years on the calendar and decided that number meant finished. Bobby stood at the rail while the bull walked through the ring and said loud enough for the row behind him to hear, "He's had his time." Can't expect a 12-year-old to do what a 4-year-old does. Anybody buying that bull is buying a lawn ornament. The room agreed. Opening bid barely cleared salvage. $1,300. One hand in the back row. Eddie's hand. Peggy was going to ask why. He'd deal with that when he got home. Now I need to tell you about Eddie Gaines, because this story only works if you understand who spent $1,300 on an animal that a room full of cattlemen considered a liability. Eddie was 82 years old. He'd been raising cattle in Pickens County, South Carolina, since he was 23, which means he'd been doing it for 59 years, which means he started before most of the men in that auction barn were born. He'd run as many as 200 head on 400 acres at the peak, a real commercial operation, employees, equipment, the kind of ranch that required every hour of every day and gave back just enough to justify the next hour. He'd sold the big herd 8 years ago. Not because the work was too hard, because Peggy sat him down on his 74th birthday and said, "Eddie, your knees don't work, your back doesn't work, your left shoulder hasn't worked since '09. You've given this land 50 years. It's time to let the land give something back." Eddie didn't sell the property. Couldn't. The land was as much a part of him as the shoulder that didn't work. He sold 330 acres to a timber company that leased the grazing rights back to him at a rate that covered the property taxes. Kept 68 acres. The home place, the barn he'd built in '72, the pasture that rolled down to the creek where his father had taught him to fish and his sons had learned to swim. And he kept cattle. 22 cows. One bull named Captain, a 7-year-old Angus cross that handled the herd without drama. 14 chickens that Peggy named and Eddie pretended not to know the names of. 2 dogs. Sandy, a 12-year-old beagle who'd been hunting rabbits since she had teeth sharp enough to care, and Hank, a 3-year-old border collie who worked the cattle with the intensity of an employee who believed the entire operation depended on him, which it partially did. This was hobby farming. Eddie knew the term and hated it. "There's no such thing as a hobby farm," he told Kevin once. "A hobby is something you do when you feel like it. A farm is something that needs doing whether you feel like it or not. The cows don't know you're retired." But the rhythm was different now. Eddie woke at 5 instead of 4:30. Fed the cows. Walked the fence line. Slowly, because his knees negotiated every hill like a labor dispute. Sat on the porch with coffee at 7 and watched the morning come in over the Blue Ridge foothills the way he'd watched it come in for 59 years. The same view. The same coffee. The same woman inside making breakfast in the same kitchen with the same cast-iron skillet that had been Peggy's grandmother's and would be somebody's granddaughter's if the boys ever got around to it. Peggy was 80. She moved at a pace that respected her joints and ignored her schedule. She still kept the garden. Tomatoes, beans, squash, the summer rotation that produced enough to eat fresh and enough to can and enough to sell at the stand in town on Saturdays. She still made cornbread every Sunday because that's what she'd always done, and stopping would have felt like admitting something neither of them was ready to admit. Kevin was 31. He worked at an engineering firm in Greenville and drove to the farm every Saturday morning. He'd taken over the heavy work, fence repair, equipment maintenance, hay hauling, The things Eddie's body couldn't do anymore, but his eyes still supervised from the porch with the authority of a man who'd done them 10,000 times and knew exactly when they were being done wrong. Dylan was 26. He worked at a bank in Anderson and came Sundays. He helped Peggy with the garden and the chickens, and whatever Eddie pointed at, that needed painting or carrying or lifting. Dylan was quieter than Kevin. He watched his father the way young men watch old men when they're starting to understand that the watching is how the knowledge transfers. Eddie mentored without calling it mentoring. Over coffee on Saturday mornings, he'd tell Kevin which pastures to rest and which to graze. He'd explain why the hay needed cutting before the seed heads dropped. He'd talk about cattle prices and when to sell and when to hold, and how the weather in September predicts the market in January. 59 years of knowledge delivered in sentences that sounded casual, but carried the weight of a man who'd paid for every lesson with a year of his life. That was Eddie's retirement. 22 cows, 2 dogs, 14 chickens, a porch, coffee, the land, and the absolute refusal to believe that 82 meant done. So when he saw Lot 12 walk through the ring at the Anderson auction, thin, old, dismissed, and heard Bobby Rusk say the bull was a lawn ornament, Eddie felt something in his chest that wasn't medical. It was personal. He looked at that bull and saw what Bobby didn't see. Because Bobby was looking at the calendar and Eddie was looking at the animal. The bull's frame was solid. His bone structure was good. His feet. Eddie always looked at the feet. Were short, tight, and showed no sign of the lameness that ends old bulls. His eyes were clear, not the dull, flat stare of an animal that's shutting down. Alert, present, looking at the crowd with the expression of something that hadn't decided to quit, even if the man who owned him had. Eddie raised his hand. 1,300, sold. He loaded the bull into his trailer and drove home to Pickens County. Peggy was on the porch shelling butter beans. She looked at the trailer, looked at Eddie. What's in the trailer, Eddie? A bull. We have a bull. We have Captain. This one's different. Different how? Eddie opened the gate. The Hereford walked down the ramp, slowly, stiff in the hind end the way old bulls get when the joints have filed a resignation. He stepped onto the grass and stood there, not moving, just breathing. Reading the property with the exhausted wariness of an animal that expected new places to mean new problems. Sandy the beagle walked over and sniffed his front hoof. The bull lowered his head and sniffed Sandy back. 2 old animals meeting without incident, past the age where anything felt worth fighting about. Hank circled the bull once. Professional assessment, decided he was livestock and therefore Hank's responsibility, and took up position 10 feet away. Peggy looked at the bull, then at Eddie. How much? $1,300. $1,300 for a bull we don't need. We don't need him, Peg. He needs us. Bobby Rusk decided that bull was finished because of a number on the calendar. I'm 82. If somebody decided I was finished because of my number, I'd want someone to look past the number and see what's still there. Peggy stared at her husband. 55 years married to a man who couldn't pass a stray dog without stopping the truck, who once drove 30 miles to return a lost hunting dog to a man in Seneca because the collar had a phone number, who believed that every living thing deserved a chance to prove it, still had something to give. You better not name him, Peggy said. You name him and he's permanent. Too late. His name's Sergeant, because he's old and he's been through more than anybody knows. Peggy went inside. Screen door closing with the same sound it had been making since '72. Eddie put Sergeant in the back pasture, separate from Captain and the cows, good grass, clean water, shade under the hickory trees along the creek. A retirement home for an animal that the industry called a write-off. The plan lasted 11 days. On day 11, Kevin drove out for his Saturday shift and found Sergeant standing in the cow pasture, with the cows, with Captain. He'd pushed through the dividing fence, 1,300 pounds of Hereford that had decided the back pasture was not where he intended to stay. He was standing beside a cow named Dolly, close in the way that bulls stand close to cows when the standing is about to become something else. Kevin called Eddie from the barn. Dad, your retirement bull is in with the cows. Eddie walked down the hill, slowly. His knees had a conversation with every step. Dad, is he? Yep, but he's 12. Eddie leaned on the fence. Son, your grandfather was still dancing with your grandmother at 84. Age is a number. Motivation is a decision. That bull just made a decision. Over the next 3 weeks, Sargent made several more decisions. He bred Dolly, then Clover, then number 14, then 2 more. 5 cows in 3 weeks. A 12-year-old bull that Bobby Rusk said couldn't do what a 4-year-old does was doing it with a consistency that made Captain look like he was on vacation. Captain seemed unbothered. The hierarchy settled quietly, based on something animals understand and humans pretend to. Eddie called Bobby Rusk on a Tuesday evening. Bobby, that bull you sold me, the one you said was done? What about him? He's bred 5 of my cows in 3 weeks. Silence. Then, that's not possible. He didn't breed a single cow his last season on my place. Conception rate was 0. That's why I sold him. Eddie looked at Sargent grazing beside Dolly. Maybe the problem wasn't the bull, Bobby. Bobby hung up. Eddie didn't call back. Some conversations finished themselves. Dr. Sandy Bledsoe, the large animal vet out of Clemson, came for a routine herd check in November. Eddie asked her to examine Sargent. Sandy ran a full workup. Teeth worn but functional. Joints arthritic but not debilitating. Body condition improved. 70 pounds heavier on Pickens County grass. Breeding soundness exam came back within normal range. There's nothing preventing this bull from breeding, Sandy said. His motility is slightly below peak but well above threshold. Then why did Bobby say he was done? Sometimes bulls stop breeding on specific operations for environmental reasons. Stress, nutrition, herd dynamics. It's not always about the age. This bull didn't retire, Eddie. He quit his last job. You gave him a new one. The calves came in June. Eddie was up at 4:30 for the first one. Peggy made coffee and stayed on the porch because she said calving was Eddie's job and watching was hers. 5 calves, all Sargents. Red body, white face. Hereford markings on Angus Cross dams. The hybrid vigor was visible before the scale confirmed it. Bigger at birth than Captain's purebred calves. 65 to 72 pounds where Captain's averaged 58 to 63. All 5 born without assistance. All 5 standing and nursing within the hour. Eddie sat on the porch with Peggy that evening. Sandy the beagle asleep at their feet. Hank on the steps pretending not to rest. The 5 calves visible in the near pasture with their dams. Sargent at the edge of the group. The position of a bull who's done his job and is watching the result. Peggy looked at the calves. Those calves are beautiful. Eddie did the math in his head. 5 calves at 600 pounds weaning weight, at current prices. Roughly $4,500 in additional revenue from a bull he'd paid $1,300 for. On top of Captain's calves. Income that didn't exist before Eddie raised his hand at an auction for an animal everybody dismissed. Kevin drove out Saturday, walked the pasture with Eddie. Dad, these calves are heavier than Captain's. The Hereford on Angus Cross? That's hybrid vigor. You accidentally created a crossbreeding program by buying a $1,300 bull out of pity. Eddie looked at his son. It wasn't pity, Kevin. It was recognition. That bull was being judged for something he couldn't control. His age, same thing they do to people. You hit a number on the calendar and everybody decides what you can't do, without asking what you still can. He paused. I'm 82. Half the county thinks I should sell this place and move to town. Your aunt has been sending us brochures for a retirement community in Greenville with a swimming pool and a dining room. A swimming pool. I've got a creek. I've got a kitchen. And I've got a 12-year-old bull that just proved the only thing wrong with him was the person who decided he was finished. Dylan came Sunday, saw the calves, took a picture of Sargent with the 5 calves behind him, posted it. My 82-year-old dad bought a 12-year-old bull for $1,300 because he felt sorry for him. The bull bred 5 cows in 3 weeks. Dad says age is a number and motivation is a decision. The post spread across farming groups nationally. The comments were half practical. Hybrid vigor pays, half emotional. That old man and that old bull are the same story. Both told they were done. both still going. Eddie didn't see the post. Peggy showed him. He read it, handed the phone back. "Tell your brother I'm not a story. I'm a farmer. And the bull isn't a story either. He's a bull that got a second chance and used it. Sergeant is 13 now, bred 4 more cows this season." Kevin calculated the total additional revenue, $14,000 in 2 calf crops from a $1,300 bull. Eddie turns 83 this spring, still gets up at 5, feeds the cows, walks the fence line with Hank at his heel and Sandy somewhere behind, moving at beagle speed, which respects the journey more than the destination. Sits on the porch at 7 with coffee and watches the morning the way he's watched it for 59 years. On Saturdays, Kevin comes. They drink coffee on the porch while Eddie tells him which pastures to rest and when the hay needs cutting. On Sundays, Dylan comes. He listens more than Kevin does, which Eddie notices and doesn't mention because mentioning it would change it. Peggy's sister sent another brochure last month. Swimming pool, dining room, fluorescent lights. A couple playing cards at a table with no view. Eddie looked at it. Looked out the window at the pasture. At the creek. At the barn he built in '72. At Sergeant standing under the hickory tree with Sandy the beagle asleep beside him. Because Sandy decided 2 years ago that the old bull was the best napping companion on the property. Eddie picked up the brochure, walked to the wood stove, opened the door. Peggy watched from the kitchen table. "Not today," he said, and walked out to check the fence,